Connect will teach how Light to Life uses and educates young leaders on dating violence and engage their voices. Your lines will be muted as mentioned before, so please feel free to use the chat box if you have any questions or need any clarity. And stay on the line after to give us feedback. The feedback survey will populate as soon as the presenter ends. Please stay on the line for that survey. And without further ado, I will introduce Tanaj Moody from Light to Life.
Hi, everybody. I hope everyone is doing great on this lovely day. Seems like we have a really good amount of people in, so I'm really excited, and I'm feeling really grateful for this opportunity. So thank you guys for all taking your time out today to tune in for this very important discussion. And so without further ado, we are going to move on into this topic. So for the learning objectives today, and what I hope that you guys can take away from today, is to first understand dating violence and the impact of trauma. You're going to learn strategies on how to create, implement, and sustain a trauma-informed program similar to Light to Life. Thirdly, how to develop and sustain relationships. And lastly, how to engage young adult voices who are impacted by dating violence. Now, before moving forward into really understanding dating violence, I think it's important for us to understand the impact of trauma, because it's important to understand what are the root causing and underlying factors to trauma, but then also how trauma impacts people who have been victimized of dating violence. And so this definition here is from the DSM-5, and it defines what is trauma to be exposure to actual or threatened death, serious injury, or sexual violence in one or more of the following ways. 1, directly experiencing the traumatic event, witnessing in person the events as it occurred to others. 3, learning that traumatic events occurred to a close family member or a close friend, in cases of actual or threatened death of family member or friend. The events must have been violent or accidental. And 4, experiencing repeated or extreme exposure to adverse details of traumatic events. Examples of that would be first responders collecting human remains, police officers repeatedly exposed to details of child abuse. Now, the note is the criteria for A4, the last one, does not apply to exposure through electronic media, television, movies, or pictures unless this exposure is work-related. So, in other words, trauma is a response to actual, perceived, or threatened death of physical violence, sexual violence, neglect, serious injury, or any kind of catastrophic natural disasters. Unhealthy early childhood relation attachments, racism, or oppression in one or more of the following ways. A person can either directly experience trauma or they can witness it. And another thing is, the one thing to mention is that this can also be experienced through social media, intrusive thoughts, or even a conversation. Now, I don't believe that this is a perfect definition of trauma, but rather a starting point for this dialogue to illustrate the different experiences that define what trauma is and how different populations experience it. As the field continuously evolves, it's my hope that this definition will too. And for now, I hope that it helps us to think about trauma from an expanded viewpoint to help us become more trauma-informed professionals. Now we're going to move on to slide 2. And with this slide, we're going to be discussing what are the top 10 causes of trauma for young people. Because now that we have this root understanding of trauma, it's important to understand how is trauma impacting young people. And with this slide here, this information is from ACEs. So consider briefly, ACEs is an adverse childhood experiences study. That's what it stands for. Consider briefly that ACEs of emotional and physical neglect it would be difficult to position those different experiences that we just discussed in a DSM-5 definition, but yet this is the most common form of abuse reported in youth in the United States. And this could even lead to devastating consequences, one of which trauma is. The ACE study, which is the Adverse Childhood Experience, was foundational in expanding the mental health field's view of what trauma is and how it's caused. But it doesn't really include the exhaustive list of experiences with the potential to lead to trauma and other experiences that lead to trauma. And so those are things that we're going to further discuss today. And with this ACEs study, this was conducted by Dr. Vincent Felicity from Kaiser in collaboration with the Center for Disease Control. And in this study, they investigated childhood experiences of approximately 17,000 who were insured middle and older age adults, and found that folks who had at least 4 adverse childhood experiences from the survey were more likely to have a slew of psychological and medical problems that could easily result in early death. And some of these top 10 causes of trauma for young people were noted in the survey to either be verbal abuse, physical abuse, sexual abuse, emotional neglect, physical neglect, divorce, parent separation, domestic violence, alcohol and drug exposure, and exposure to mental illness and suicide, and lastly, having a household member in prison. So these are some of the top 10 causes of trauma for young people. And the above definition captures a lot of different experiences that cause trauma that we talked about when we just reviewed what the DSM-5 defined trauma as. However, it falls just short in fully capsulating all the complexities of the experiences of trauma from single events. And hopefully this could give you a better idea of different forms of trauma, in particular of what young people face. And so there's all different types of trauma that impact people. And everyone is a case-by-case situation, but it's also important for us to understand not only what trauma is, right, and the different types of trauma that impact young people particularly, but understanding these different types. And here's 4 different types of trauma that were from the Center for Institutional and Social Change. The first type of trauma is single incident. Single incident could be anything natural or human causes that can be unintentional or intentional, which can include the following: earthquake, hurricane, home fire, a plane crash, illness, or terrorism. The second type of trauma is vicarious trauma. And vicarious trauma is also known as indirect trauma. So provider symptoms upon exposure to the client's experience of the trauma. So that really means that a person may not directly experience the trauma, but may witness someone else experiencing a traumatic event. Third is intergenerational trauma, the transmission of historical oppression and its negative consequences across generations. And this is similar to what we were talking about before in the DSM-5, where it doesn't directly include this, but a part of that is also racism and oppression. And those are also that would be considered intergenerational trauma. The last one is re-traumatization, which is a relapse into a state of trauma triggered by a subsequent event. And we're going to further discuss what those subsequent events are, but for an example would be any kind of triggers such as a particular word or maybe an environment that could cause a re-traumatization of this person to experience these similar emotions that occurred when the trauma happened. So now that we have an understanding of what trauma is, right, and how it impacts young people, I think it's also important for us to understand how trauma affects the brain. So another aspect of practicing and being a trauma-informed professional and creating these trauma-informed practices is having a basic understanding on how it affects the brain. Why? Because this will give us a deeper insight into the next tip on how it affects youth behaviors. Basically, the brain can be simply categorized into these three different layers that you see on the screen here. And the first is the hindbrain. And the hindbrain is evolutionally the oldest part of the brain that comprises the brain stem and the cerebellum. This part of the brain controls our essential functions that we don't think about, like breathing and our heart beating. And you're going to see that towards the back of this gentleman's head. The next is the midbrain, also sometimes known as the emotional brain or the emotional center. This is the limbic system, and it's comprised of the amygdala. And our amygdala is our fear center. The hippocampus, which also has to do with memory, and it's also comprised of the thalamus, which absorbs sensory information, and the hypothalamus. And the hypothalamus is the messenger between these other two parts of the brain, which is the midbrain and the hindbrain. And then finally, the most recent layer of the brain is the forebrain. And we share this and the midbrain with other mammals, except our forebrain is comparatively bigger than other mammals. And this part of the brain is responsible for language, abstract thought, perspective taking, and executive functioning. Now, all of this seems like a lot probably if you haven't had seen something like this before or understand how trauma affects the brain. But I'm going to break this down for you in a way for you to understand how trauma does impact the brain and how a person responds in their behavior. So essentially, the take-home part about how trauma affects the brain is that the thalamus, right, absorbs sensory information. So let's say, for an example, a person walking towards a knife, their thalamus is absorbing that sensory information. Then your amygdala, which is the emotional part, it's going to be interpreting that as danger. It's the alert system. So a part of your brain is going to go off saying danger, danger, and basically sirens are going to be going off in your head. Then the hypothalamus connects directly with your automatic nervous system, which is via the hindbrain, and triggers you to go into the fight, flight, or freeze mode. And I'm sure some of you have heard of that before, which is essentially all of this communication to your forebrain, the thinking, deciding, and the logical brain that gets cut off. So this is why when some people experiencing danger or are triggered trauma, it's difficult for them to make decisions, to concentrate, to even conduct simple executive tasks. If the communication to the executive function of the brain is cut off, how do we think that that will impact learning and behavior within our youth and how they are reacting in classrooms or in therapy or in these other settings if they have experienced trauma? Right. And so I'm sure all of you guys are kind of thinking the same thing, that this understanding of how trauma impacts a person can have a really bad negative impact on how they respond in an environment, especially if people aren't able to understand it. And this drastic impact can sometimes, when a youth is in a class, can be defined as having defiant behavior. And that's not always what we want people to think, because people, if they don't have this understanding of what we're talking about today, then they don't understand that something can be happening to this individual where they have experienced trauma and a trigger has occurred. And this is essential in understanding of being a trauma-informed professional, but also implementing trauma-informed care. And so these other ways that trauma affects people, now that we have that understanding of how it can affect someone mentally, there's so many different ways, right? And there's some ways here. We have the physical health, your mental health, and your cognitive. So for the physical health and trauma affecting people, physically, a person can have higher rates of disease, such as diabetes, Crohn's disease, cancer, and heart disease, and even sleep problems. For mental health, an individual can have higher rates of anxiety, depression, suicide, low self-esteem, feelings of hopelessness, feelings of helplessness. And cognitively, similar to what we were just discussing about how trauma affects the brain, a person's going to have trouble focusing, right? They're going to have repeated traumatic experiences that lead to an overreactive stress system, which we were just talking about, that fight, flight, or freeze response if someone is easily triggered. The next is it's going to be hard for them to follow or retain information, or they're going to have memory issues. And all of these things can impact the way a person learns and also the way a person behaves. And so the last part is an individual may also have difficulty organizing their time or even prioritizing tasks. And here are some more additional ways on how trauma can affect other individuals as well. So behaviorally, we're going to see an individual or youth more likely to engage in risky behavior, higher rates of addiction to drugs and alcohol, higher rates of eating disorders, homelessness, a heightened state of alert, hard to regulate emotions and aggression, right? And so some of these ways that you can see this is maybe an individual may be acting out in class, or an individual may not know how to communicate their emotions in an effective way and act out physically. And so those are some of the behavioral ways that trauma can affect a person. Relationships and relational, that trauma can affect someone with their lack of trust in their peers or suspicious of authority figures. So not having trust in police officers or even authority figures such as parents. This individual may feel isolated, or a go-it-alone mentality where they are very independent and just want to take care of things on their own and don't feel like they can get the help of other people. And other thing is higher likelihood of conflict in relationships. So because an individual may not know how to regulate their emotions well, also means that they may not know how to communicate them, which is going to cause conflict in relationships. And then lastly is those re-traumatizations, right? So a person's going to have like simple triggers where they're going to maybe something with the language, maybe a word that someone says may trigger a traumatic experience, or the way someone says it, right? If someone is putting their voice at a high level or versus a low level, and maybe this person is triggered by high level voices. And hypervigilance. So this person, this youth or individual, is going to have a very uneasy and heightened state of alert in certain environments that may remind them of their trauma. And so these things are other ways that trauma can affect people, and in particular young people as well. And so now that we have this understanding on what trauma is, right, and how trauma can impact a person cognitively, physically, and mentally and behaviorally, it's also important now for us to have an understanding on what dating violence is, because now we can better see how this trauma that someone experiences who is a victim of dating violence, what that person is going to be experiencing. But it's important for us to really define and understand what dating violence is before moving forward. So according to the Center of Disease Control, dating violence is defined as the physical, sexual, psychological, or emotional aggression within a dating relationship. That can also include stalking. And there's other forms of abuse, and also these are different warning signs. So one is verbal. Second is psychological or emotional abuse, physical, sexual, digital, and fourth, substance use. So these are 6 types of the dating abuse, but then in addition to that, also warning signs to be aware of someone who may be experiencing an unhealthy relationship or even an abusive relationship. And so dating abuse in the community, especially in the young community, is not spoken to youth as much as it's needed. So therefore, there's a lack of education on this issue. And only 33% of youth actually report to someone that they have been in an abusive relationship, and 81% of parents do not believe that teen dating violence is an actual issue or admit that they don't know if it is an issue. So that's an issue in itself. So dating abuse has impacted nearly 1.5 million high school students nationwide, young adults reported that they have experienced physical dating abuse from their partner in a single year. And so dating abuse has impacts on all of these indigenous people, and primarily first is our high school students. The next is our college students. So college students, it's not only impacting high school, it's a silent epidemic among college campuses. So nearly half of 43% of college women reported experiencing violent or abusive dating behaviors. And so in addition to that, we have our LGBTQ youth, right? And so this population also is a population that is not spoken about as much. And so I want to note here that domestic violence is universal. It doesn't matter who you are. It doesn't matter your sexual orientation. It doesn't matter about your religion, your race. Any of those things do not matter, because domestic violence can happen to anyone. And there is a lot of limited research on the LGBT community in relation to dating violence, but the LGBTQs are also impacted in the same way as heterosexual relationships. And so heterosexual youth reported being physically abused by their partners. 42.8% of the gay bisexual youth reported the same. In addition to that, transgender youth reported the highest rate of dating violence, with 88.9% reporting physical dating violence. Now, these statistics are not even nearly close to what it actually can be, because a lot of these statistics go underreported. And I want to note that because there's so many reasons why people don't or even realize that they're in an abusive or unhealthy relationship. And so therefore, some of these statistics are not even completely accurate, right? Because there's people that don't discuss it for many reasons, and one being that they don't even realize that they're in an abusive relationship, or they're not educated about what these warning signs are, or they're embarrassed, right? And so we're going to be talking about so many of these reasons in the further slides down.
Hi, Sanaj. We have a request in the chat box. If you could please repeat the statistics about parents not believing the dating abuse is real.
Oh, sure. So it's 81% of parents.
Thank you.
81%. Yes. Okay, great. Thank you. So there's other reasons, right? Not only having an understanding of what dating violence is, the definition of it, and who dating violence impacts, right? But we also have to understand, why do people stay in abusive relationships? It's a common question that's asked, and a common question that really is misinterpreted, and it's not very understood. So part of the reason why individuals and youth stay in these relationships is because there's a general pattern of behavior that is a cycle of violence. And you're going to see in this chart here, I know it's a little blurry, but I'm going to explain to you what this cycle means. So the first part of this cycle is tension building. And with the tension building, this means that the relationship between these two partners begin to get strained or tense between the partners. So this could be, this individual has a fear of them walking on eggshells, or they feel guilty, or their partner has very unpredictable behavior, right? And this could be anything. With an example of someone in a relationship, maybe someone who has an abusive partner who is constantly checking their phone, and you're feeling as though that this individual is going to get nervous at the fact that a male texts your phone. And that's that tension rising in a relationship, because you're scared of how your boyfriend is going to react. right? And so we're just going to use this boyfriend and girlfriend just for this example. And the next part of this is going to be the explosion. And the explosion is this violence part. So it's an outburst that includes any kinds of those forms of abuse that we were talking about before. And it could be verbal, emotional, or physical. And so this partner checks your phone, we're going back to this example, and sees that a male has texted you. And so that tension has already risen, and now we have this violence part. And so your partner may threaten you verbally and say to you, if you don't stop texting this person, you know, I'm going to throw your phone, or I'll break your phone, or I'm going to go and try to beat this person up. And that could be this verbal abuse, right? And it's threatening this person. Or it could turn into something physical where this person then acts out and hits you or hits something in the environment to scare you. And then this last part of this cycle, right, is the honeymoon. So this is when the abuser apologizes for what they've done, and or shifts the blame onto someone or someone else. So they're not taking accountability for their actions. So after this partner has reacted negatively to seeing someone else text their girlfriend's phone, and they physically have hit them or verbally have abused them, now they're going into this honeymoon stage where they're sorry and they're being very apologetic, or they're blaming their partner for saying, you know, why are you texting this guy? You know, I don't like when you text him, or things like that, right? So shifting that blame. So mind you, this is a cycle, right? And so when I say this is a cycle, this is something that gets repeated often. So people who are not aware of these warning signs, or do not have support systems in place, or are not educated about what dating violence is and how trauma can impact a person, is going to continue going through this cycle over and over again. And that's one reason why individuals will stay in these abusive or unhealthy relationships. And so here are some other reasons for why young people stay in abusive or unhealthy relationships, right? We talked about that fear. Another thing that's not talked about is believing that abuse is normal, right? You may have individuals who have experienced trauma in their home, whether it was that vicarious trauma, right, witnessing their parents fight each other, or even directly being abused from their mother or from their father. Those are other forms of trauma, and also other forms of dating violence or domestic violence. And so because of that, they believe that this abuse in this relationship is normal. This is how I've been treated throughout my life, and so why should I expect anything different? The next thing is fearing of being outed. And so this really applies to our LGBTQ youth, where they may be in a relationship with an individual who is not fully comfortable with coming out and expressing their sexual orientation to their family yet. And their abusive partner may threaten to tell their friends and family. And so because of that, they stay in their abusive relationship. The next is an embarrassment or shame, low self-esteem, right, and pregnancy. So some other reasons are love, which is a very big component that a lot of people don't think about. Just because people are in these abusive or unhealthy relationships does not mean that they do not love their partner. Cultural or religious reasons, language barriers or immigration status, which really applies to older populations, as well as the lack of money or resources, which also could apply more to the older population. And disabilities. So this person is very dependent on another individual for their independence. And distrust of adults or authority, so not believing, back to what we were talking about earlier, about that 81% of parents not realizing that this is an issue, where if you express to your parents, you may not think that they'll believe you or that they'll take it serious, or even in police, where there's a fear of going to the police because of fear of getting in trouble, or fear that that nothing will be done. And then the last is social peer pressure. And this is social peer pressure of really your peers and staying in relationships because of a certain status that an individual has in high school and those kinds of things. And so what is the impact that dating violence has for young people, right? Now, we've gone through a little bit on understanding, you know, why people and why young people stay in these relationships and understanding how the trauma can impact someone. But what's the specific impact of dating violence for young people and that trauma? So similar to what we were talking about before, and the impact of trauma is similar to the impact of dating violence for young people. And that can include attempts of suicide, reports of feeling hopelessness and sadness. This young person may be doing poorly in school, or they may not attend school due to feeling unsafe. Report binge drinking, right, engaging in this risky behavior, smoking, using drugs, or engaging in unhealthy diet behaviors, including taking pills or laxatives and vomiting to lose weight, right? This goes back to that low self-esteem about what we were talking about. The individual may even become pregnant or have an STD. They develop a negative body image and become uncomfortable with their sexuality and be overly dependent on others and not achieving their own independency. So really developing these codependent behaviors. Some other challenges that a young person may have who have experienced or are currently in a dating violent relationship, is establishing intimacy with a partner, becoming a positive member of society, developing a personal value system, right? And that's part of that independency. And in addition to that, establishing an adult identity. And so those are all other ways, in addition to what we've already discussed about trauma, but in particular how dating violence can impact a young person. And so now we're going to really dive into the second part, where we're going to be talking about strategies on how to create and implement and sustain a trauma-informed program like Light to Life. And so we're going to dive into, one, giving some background information on Light to Life and these different strategies that I've used to create this program and develop these partnerships to engage youth voices on dating violence. And so some of these tips here in this slide where I'm talking about this trauma-informed program are things that I have used with my program Light to Life. And I think it's important for you to all know that I started this organization because I am actually a survivor of domestic violence, and I was a victim at the age of 16. So I have made it my obligation and duty to prevent and educate other young individuals on this dating issue, because I feel as though if I would have had the similar support in my youth, that I may have never been in an abusive relationship, or I would have left sooner. And so part of these strategies is, the one is develop a trauma-informed lens, right? And this is really what we're talking about today. And a trauma-informed lens is really having an understanding of how single traumatic events can contribute to a slew of different behavioral traumatic adaptations. And this is the behavioral manifestation that a person adapts as a protective mechanism to cope psychologically with their trauma that they've experienced. And like we were talking about before, like this can be aggressive behaviors or physical intimidation or verbal assault. And also, you know, developing these defensive mechanisms. And the key here is to develop this trauma-informed lens is to not over-interpret everyone's behavior as trauma, but rather to consider the possibility that out of the ordinary behaviors stem from trauma, right? So for an example, a youth gets disproportionately angry with you when you ask them a simple request, and this youth may become dazed or may not be concentrating in your classroom or in any other setting. And we may not understand that this could be a form of trauma that they face, or something you have said, or maybe the specific environment that they are in have triggered something to cause them to have a re-traumatization. And so I think it's good for us to have an understanding of the fact that all behaviors, do not stem from trauma, but to also not overly interpret it, but to have a understanding that out of the ordinary behaviors of what we were discussing before should not automatically be brushed off as someone being defiant, and consider the fact that this person may have experienced some form of trauma in their life. And it's important because this will help us do our job better and help us develop a trauma-informed practice that can lead to better practices and programs for our youth. The next is developing this trauma-informed curriculum, which I've developed as part of Light to Life's mission in educating young adults. And part of that is understanding that a lot of these young adults, the main reason that there's a lot of issues surrounding dating violence and why there's a lot of silence around this epidemic is because youth are not educated or even aware that they may be in an abusive or unhealthy relationship. And that's exactly the reason why I became a victim of domestic violence. Similar to what we were talking about before, where a person may experience trauma and may normalize behaviors that they've seen in their home, right? Because I've witnessed violence in my home, I normalized those behaviors and thought that was how I should be treated in my relationship. And because of that, that's what one reason, contributing factor of what led me to be in my abusive relationship. So if we can create a trauma-informed curriculum that addresses all of these different issues that a person may experience who is in an unhealthy relationship or an abusive relationship, and understanding what trauma is and dating violence, then we can create a trauma-informed curriculum to better educate our youth to prevent them from engaging in these types of relationships, or even to help and support them while transitioning, or if they decide to stay in these relationships. The other thing is authentic partnerships. Now, this is a really important part of the development of my organization and why I think I've been able to successfully build partnerships and engage youth, is because I've been able to develop authentic relationships with small businesses, community organizations, and colleges and high schools that really align with my mission and the work that I'm doing. And it's important to find individuals who are truly passionate and really do care about younger generations and who are doing the groundwork and working directly with individuals who are impacted so that they can have a better understanding of why this work is important. The other tool that has helped me develop this trauma-informed program for Light to Life is fostering self-advocacy, resilience, and resourcefulness skills in the youth that I work with. So rather than solving students' problems that I work with, I encourage them to brainstorm their own solutions. And I do that in my workshops that we'll further discuss throughout this presentation. But when you're able to do that, you're creating that that independency, right, which as a result can increase the person's confidence, where a person is actually able to have autonomy, and also increases an individual's self-esteem. So these are all positive things that can impact a person who is being negatively impacted by dating violence. And in addition to that, asking them to consider their external and internal resources. So really leading a person and guiding an individual who is in these unhealthy relationships to the right path, and getting them to really make their own decisions, and just being a real strong support for them, which leads me to peer support. And this comes with creating a safe space. And so with Light to Life, and what I've been able to do is really create peer support on campuses. And by doing that, I've been able to create a safe space where individuals are able to feel connected and supported. And as a result of this, it creates trust. And once this trust is created among peers in the community, or in college campuses, or in high schools, this is the foundation for a strong foundational relationship, which as a result creates this peer support for people to feel connected and not alone, and that eliminates them from feeling isolated or thinking that they're the only one experiencing what they're going through. And so in these next slides, we're going to further discuss how these different strategies are implemented in further details once we go on to the next slide. And so part of this trauma-informed model, and why it's important to really have an understanding, is to first begin to understand the origin behind how Light to Life was established, which we discussed, and because this is what has made Light to Life successful. So not sure if I mentioned this before, but the framework of this program model developed at Wesley College, where I had founded this first domestic violence organization on campus, with the help of other peers that have joined my mission when I was in college developing this program. And part of this program model that we utilized was stemming off of this diagram here, where our three main hierarchies are education, awareness, and breaking the silence. And education is the biggest piece here, because once we're educated, we're able to break the silence, and it also increases awareness. And the ways that Light to Life has increased awareness has been through primary and secondary school collaborations, and also through community collaboration. And the way that Light to Life has been able to break the silence of this silent epidemic has really been engagement through social media as well, and engaging these voices. And so with this program model, I'm going to be breaking down different tactics and strategies on how I've been able to develop partnerships, and how I've been able to engage young voices who have been impacted by dating violence. And so Light to Life's mission, as I was discussing before, is to raise awareness, offer education and information, and provide a support network of resources. And so this is our main mission on how we accomplish those goals of breaking the silence and educating people and creating awareness around this issue. And this image here is some students that I've worked with at Howard University, and I've partnered with their organization on campus called the Healing Bison, and also the Psychology Club. And Light to Life operates under 4 core values. And these values are very important because this is essential in how I've been able to build healthy relationships with young adults and communities and college campuses and small businesses on how to really engage in and build these partnerships. And the first is respect. So I really value treating every person with acceptance, regardless of their race, their age, their socioeconomic status, or even sexual orientation. Because like I said before, domestic violence is universal, and it can happen to anyone, and I believe that no matter who someone is, that everyone should be treated with respect. The next is transparency. I believe in removing barriers and offering that safe space for individuals to voice their story and to share their survival story with no judgment. The next is patience. So really accepting individuals for who they are and what they're struggling with. Because dating abuse, you have to have a lot of understanding and empathy towards individuals who may be going through that cycle of violence. The next is social responsibility. And social responsibility really involves community events, like partnering with these different communities and organizations and schools with the respect to authority and the law. And so primarily I serve different clients in nonprofits, businesses, government agencies. I'm also right now a workshop presenter. I do support group facilitations. I've served as a panelist and guest speaker as well. And so now we're going to really dive into these strategies like I was discussing before on really how to engage youth voices, and then we're going to really dive into these tactics and how these tactics are going to be utilized in a more detailed way on how to develop these partnerships. And so with these tactics, you see here where it says the first is create a strategic communications plan, identify the situation and the problems and opportunity. And so with Life to Life, I've been able to identify the problem here is obviously dating violence, right, and creating the goal. The goal here is to raise awareness, educate people, and break the silence, and identifying our audience. And identifying the audience is composed of having grad students or even undergrad students or community members. And it's important for you to be able to identify your audience so you can understand who your target audience is. And then with that, we go into the psychographics, right? And so really understanding who is going to be service-oriented. So what organizations or businesses or individuals are going to be service-oriented that align with your mission. The next tactic is the demographics, so identifying like exactly where students live or where these young people live on campus or off campus, where is the most popular place that they reside. The next is developing the strategy on really how to outreach them, right? And we're going to be talking about the different types of strategies through social media. The next is developing the objective. And so really understanding like what do you want people to have as the key messages to take away to understand your mission and why you are facilitating or implementing this type of trauma-informed care for individuals. And so with these different tactics for youth engagement, we're going to dive into how to apply these more in detail. And so the first that I talked about was really identifying the situation and problem. And so the situation and problem here was youth are not educated on dating violence. And so because of that, I developed this trauma-informed curriculum that we were discussing before that include these six workshops that I facilitate on college campuses. And so with these 6 workshops, these are psychoeducational workshops to really raise awareness of individuals' emotions and to educate them and create more safe spaces for them to be connected. So the first workshop is called Love is Blind, which really educates young adults on the different types of abuse. And so this workshop aims to educate them on how to identify various types of abuse that not only include physical, but the emotional, verbal, sexual, digital, and stalking. And students are going to be provided with preventative tools and strategies on how to identify warning signs of an unhealthy relationship. The next workshop that I discussed is Communication 101, which is healthy relationships. And basically, healthy relationships may take some time to create, but we also understand that conflicts may arise. And so in this workshop, we really talk about conflict resolution tips and how to effectively communicate with your partner to better understand your partner, which as a result, the relationship will become stronger. The next workshop is Consent 101. And Consent 101, this is important because it's important to inform people about consent and respecting each other's boundaries and not being ashamed of willingly engaging in or even rejecting sexual activity. So with this workshop, individuals have a clear understanding of what consent is and what it looks like and what are red flags. Workshop 4 is risky behavior, so discussing about the drugs, alcohol, abuse, and suicide. And so with these different types of risky behaviors, abusive behavior can also have negative psychological impact on the individual, which can lead to obvious health problems. Victims may be using pills or alcohol to cope with the emotions and the toll of the abuse, which can lead to addictions or even suicide. And so individuals with this workshop will have an understanding of the relationship between domestic violence, substance abuse, and suicide. And with that, the LGBTQ Relationships 101 is another workshop that we talk on because, like I had mentioned before, LGBTQ youth is part of a population that goes underreported a lot. And so with this, we talk about how healthy relationships all look different, but should be created on the same foundation of equality and respect. And this workshop really aims to identify abusive patterns in same-sex relationships while still providing a support network. And the last but not least is the Love Yourself Self-Care Workshop. And this is one of my favorites because this is one of the most important parts of developing a relationship is developing a relationship with yourself. And this workshop really aims to help young adults develop self-love and tips and techniques on how that works and also what is self-love and what is self-care. And individuals are able to learn how to accept themselves by discovering the possibilities of the self and understand who they are and how they want to be treated. And so young adults will be provided with tools and techniques of self-care. And so this is part of developing really that trauma-informed, a combination of developing that trauma-informed lens and in addition to developing that trauma-informed curriculum and applying all of these things that we're learning today in 6 different workshops that educate and will raise awareness and will help break the silence for young adults on college and high school campuses and in the communities as well. And so part of breaking down what those tactics were that we discussed before is now going to be discussing how to outreach to primary and secondary colleges. And so I've partnered with a whole bunch of different universities in the tri-state area, from starting at Wesley College to University of Delaware, Temple University, University of Penn, and Howard University most recently, and also Parkway Middle School. And with that, my strategies of outreach have, one, to target my audience, research faculty professors. And so with these two, I've been able to target my audience to understand that I'm outreaching to colleges, campuses, and also high school campuses, and then researching which faculty members would align with my mission. So for instance, you know, if you're looking on colleges or high schools' website, you're able to see what professors are teaching what subject areas. And so I primarily aim towards psychology, criminal justice, sociology, and those particular types of professors. And then in addition to that, developing pitch letters to professors for pop-up talks. And what that means is creating just a simple email that you're going to be sending to these professors to inform them about what your mission is, and the current work you're doing and the services that you can provide. And you're asking them to just come in for a 15 or 20-minute discussion so that you can present to the students about the organization that you have to raise awareness and educate young adults on dating violence. And the next is connecting with student organizations on campus. So not only are you going to be researching faculty professors, but you're also going to be researching student organizations on campuses that align with your mission. So for instance, at Howard University, I really partnered a lot with Healing Bison, which is a mental health organization on their campus, and also their psychology club as well. And same thing at Temple University. For the professors, I was able to partner with their faculty professor who taught in criminology. And so the last thing to sustain these kind of relationships, you want to create this email list of influencers. So making sure that you're able to maintain your contacts for all of these individuals by creating this email list to continuously reach out to these individuals when you're hosting different events or are doing different online campaigns, or would like to just let them know of current things that you're doing in the community. And the last thing that I do when I send out my pitch letter to professors is send out my media kit and a recap video. And with this recap video, I'm going to see if we can show you guys this video. Okay, so I think we're loading the video right now. And so with this recap video, this is part of promoting my business and also my services.
And so to give you a background, right, on Light to Life and how everything came about, I grew up watching my mom be abused in multiple relationships. I actually experienced a very abusive relationship with someone that I was with for about 3 years. And I had enough. At this point, I had enough of getting beaten on. I had enough of just someone controlling my every move. And I fought back. Graduated high school, went to college, still going through my own personal trauma. And because of that, I realized there has to be other people that experience this. I know I'm not the only one. And so I decided to start Light to Life at Wesley College as the first domestic violence organization on our campus.
Okay, I think everyone should be settled in right now. I hope you guys enjoyed that video. And so part of that video is really not only giving people, you know, sending over this email, but I'm really bringing to life Light to Life work and the services that I provide. And videos really do help with content and promotion because it's just easier to watch, and it's a quicker way to engage and express what you're trying to say visually if people aren't able to set up meetings with you right away. And so it's one great way to really engage people and promote your services and your organization. And I send that in my emails for the pop-up talks as well. And so here are just a few other pictures from other universities that I've collaborated with. Again, this was Wesley College recently, about a couple months ago, that I did a presentation there on Love is Blind. And this is a picture from Howard University, another event that I've hosted there. I've hosted multiple events at Howard where we did an open mic night to raise awareness on mental health. And so the next part is these community collaborations. I've been able to partner with multiple different community collaborations from nonprofits that include North Central Victim Services, Men Can Stop Rape, the Choose Respect Montgomery, the DC Coalition to End Sexual Violence, and also some small businesses recently in DC, Washington, DC, the Village Cafe, the Cove, and also the Office of the Assistant Secretary for Planning and Evaluation by Policy Research Associates. So I've had really great opportunities to reach out to these different community collaborations, and the way I've been able to do that are listed here. So some of my strategies of outreach have been really simple. So I use the acronym KISS, so keep it super simple. And research your local nonprofits and small businesses that support social issues or host community events. And then from doing that, you're able to create really like a list of continuity and individuals that you're able to reach out to, but also have and maintain contact that you can reach out to later in the future. And then again is you send out that pitch email that I was discussing before to professors to a point of contact to those different local nonprofits or small businesses to share your organization or an event that you're hosting. And you can send a video or you can send a flyer or even a media kit, which are all things that I do. And the next is schedule introduction meetings. So when I send out this email, I also mention to them if they'd like to schedule to meet up for a nice coffee or if someone would like to have a conference call. And so that way they're able to really hear my voice or even put a face to my name, which helps with fostering that relationship. And the other thing that I do that helps a lot is promoting my events on Eventbrite. And so with that Eventbrite, most of my events are free events because I think education should be free. And with this event that I post on Eventbrite, basically Eventbrite has its own process and system, but it's very simple. You just pretty much have to post and have an understanding of what the event is, how many attendants you want, and if you want to sell your tickets for a cost or not a cost. And then you're able to provide and send a link to community members or people within your network via phone or an email or even through social media. And the last thing that I do that has helped me a lot is attending events of local nonprofits and small businesses and that they're hosting. And so with that, I'm really able to build and foster and maintain my community relationships, because if they're supporting me in my events or they're asking me to facilitate workshops, then it's important for me to do the same for their organizations or for their businesses. And I'm seeing here, I think, to touch back on this question about how I develop these school partnerships with middle schools or even with high schools, just to go back on that, if I'm able to, do I create MOUs, memorandums of understanding, and what kind of teachers that I reach out to. And so with that, I do not create MOUs. The thing that I send is basically I send over a contract because of an LLC program, and I send the contract to them, and they fill out the contract, and then I also get consent forms for anyone who's under the age of 18 if they're able to have pictures or videos be taken from my organization's communication leadership team. And so with that, that's how that's created. And the kind of teachers that I reach out to, it really doesn't vary with high school in terms of subjects, but mostly reaching out to any faculty members that would really be interested. And so I reach out to a vast majority of high school teachers from math, reading, social studies, whatever the subject is, because high school is kind of hard to really identify particular classes that individuals would be interested in. So I just send it out to everyone because I feel like it's harder to identify specific courses as different to college, where in college I'm able to say, okay, well, psychology classes would have an interest in understanding trauma or dating violence, or criminal justice classes would have an interest in this topic. And so that is how I really partner with high schools and middle schools, high schools and colleges, and how I really establish a contract rather than an MOU. So I hope that answered that question. So right here are just some pictures of community collaborations that I've done. At the Choose Respect Montgomery, I was a keynote speaker where I shared my survivor story to 100 plus high school students, where they host this event every year to raise awareness about dating violence and provide individuals with resources and different information on how to learn about dating violence and to get help. And here I was featured in the DC Coalition to End Sexual Violence newsletter. And mind you, all of these collaborations were able to be established, and I've been able to get this kind of press because I've been able to foster these relationships through those different strategies of outreach that I've mentioned before. And part of that is attending their events and supporting them, and really also, in addition to that, reposting and sharing their events on social media or through my network via email or texting as well. And then here's some more pictures from another community collaboration that I did at the Village Cafe with these men on the left, where I was able to host an event regarding Black men's mental health. And with the Village Cafe, I still attend a lot of their events to this day, and I've been able to really build a great partnership with them. And the second image here is a group picture from the Office of Assistant Secretary for Planning and Evaluation by the Policy Research and Associates, where I was asked to come and provide my expertise on how I engage youth in dating violence conversations. And so this last part here is the part of how to engage youth voices, where we were talking about that umbrella, where I was talking about the trauma-informed program model that I use with the education and the raising awareness and breaking the silence. So breaking the silence part of that is through social media. And social media is a really big thing, especially with our young population. YouTube, Instagram, Snapchat are the most popular online platforms among teens. Pew Research Center for Internet and Technology showed that fully 95% of teens have access to a smartphone. So what better way to reach youth than through online media? And so as the smartphone access has become more prevalent, a growing share of teens report that 45% of them say that they've used the internet almost constantly, and that figure has doubled since 2014 and 15, and 44% of them say that they go online several times a day just to go onto their social media. And so part of this strategy is really breaking the silence through social media and understanding the target audience and what are the demographics and how can they be reached and where are they going to be reached most likely, right? And so part of these strategies that I use is creating an Instagram page layout, online campaigns, national awareness calendar, and paid promotional videos. And so in these next slides, I'm going to further discuss these things in a little bit more detail. And so with the Instagram page layout, it's important for you to understand that aesthetic is everything when it comes to social media. And so it's important to choose a theme, title the theme, choose a theme color, and choose an app to help you create the theme, and choose a story behind each theme. And so this specific example in this image that I have here is a theme that I wanted to really raise awareness on for Black History Month. And with Black History Month, I did a focus of Black women who are impacted and who are at risk to dating violence, and then also impacted other young Black women and even older Black women in history who have had a really big impact on the Black women community. And I think with that, aesthetically, I was able to choose a theme color that aligned with this theme and an app to help me create this theme. And so I don't know if anyone's ever heard of it, but one of my most popular apps that I use to create these themes is Canva. And so Canva is pretty much very straightforward and will help you through each step on creating these different designs, the type of font, the type of text you want to use, and pictures and images. And then lastly, behind these themes is always choose a story. And so with your social media outreach and breaking the silences, you want to choose a story to break the silence. And my story was to raise awareness on Black women and the issues they face regarding domestic violence. The next thing is social media campaigns. And so with the social media campaigns, it really does help engage youth voices, and I've been able to do that successfully in many of ways. And one was through my Speak Your Truth campaign and the Advocate of the Month campaign. And so with the Speak Your Truth campaign, I advertise that through Instagram, Facebook, and my website, and also when I go on to university campuses. And so with the Speak Your Truth campaign, people literally just say, you can see on that picture, it's kind of blurry on the left-hand side with the women holding that picture, on why they want to be a voice against domestic violence. And they're able to participate that and post that on social media and tag me and share it with their friends. And you're able to engage individuals in this conversation and then also increase your network. And with the Advocate of the Month, I'm also able to do that and advertise it through Instagram, Facebook, my website, and also through other streams of social media. And with the Advocate of the Month, the main purpose of that is to really highlight a youth who is doing great work in the community as a leader, and to raise awareness on a certain issue that they're educating their other peers on. And so I really want to dive into the Speak Your Truth campaign because we are running a little bit short on time, and I want to make sure you guys see this video. This is a video campaign that I've been able to do and engage youth voices, where individuals have signed a consent form and have the courage to share their survival story, with the hopes that this video content can create awareness and educate individuals on this issue, but also encourage others to speak up and speak their truth.
But the only time I can remember that they actually engaged in a fight was one day. I don't know how old I was. I was somewhere in between middle school and elementary and middle school, and I can just remember we would fight in my mom's room. It wasn't necessarily abuse, because it wasn't I guess one way. It wasn't one-sided. My mom would hit him and he would hit her. So it was kind of a full exchange. But I just remember hearing them fight. I remember hearing my mom scream. And then I remember so I feel if I was to talk to someone who may be going through similar situation, I would just say to see the light in it, see the lesson in it, see it as one bump in the road. You can get over it, move through it, and allow it to build your character in a positive way, I have.
That's great. That's perfect. I think that's the best advice you can give to someone. Thank you. Can I have
Like they said, this will be shared to you, and this can also be found on my website and also my social media, which will be shared with you as well. Now, to finish up and wrap up what we were talking about in terms of social media outreach, the last thing after these online campaigns is talking about creating this national awareness calendar. And so the reason I've been able to have consistent content similar to that Instagram page layout that you saw earlier is because I've been able to create a national awareness calendar. And so with that calendar, I'm able to promote content that aligns with my mission. And I'm also to be able to create a theme based off of these different calendar events. So for instance, recently my posts now have been on my Instagram regarding the June for men's health. And so with that, I've been able to create a theme around the color blue to represent men's health and also talk about different issues that impact young men and also specifically young Black men as well. And so the National Awareness Calendar is one way to really help with creating content and creating content consistent with your mission. The next two things is paid promotional videos. And so these videos that you've seen today have also been paid promotional videos. And what that means is I'm able to have a bigger outreach on social media and to share my services and the work that I'm doing through paying either Instagram or Facebook. And you reach a very large population because you're able to target specific populations over a course of days, and you're able to have a larger impact and outreach through paid promotional videos. And the last thing here is connecting with social media influencers. And so that means connecting and following individuals on social media that align with your mission, and really social media influencers that are going to be able to outreach to larger communities in another way if they have more followers than you on Instagram or on Facebook. And this next slide here is some way that I've been able to do that is connecting with Ambitious Girl, who really, in this post on the right, was able to highlight my organization because I connected and outreached to her through a direct message on Instagram, sending her over my pitch, sending her over my promotional video, and letting her know about the work that I do because I knew this aligned with her work that she does with highlighting young women entrepreneurs who are providing a service to young people. The next was, part of this was Everything Girls Love, and I was featured in their blog. And they really promote a whole bunch of young women in social media, but also in the community, and then also mainstream just a lot of events that are going on within the community as well. And I outreach to them directly through also sending out an email to different bloggers that aligned with my mission as well. And so this last part, I really just want to wrap up and leave you guys with some calls to action as we wrap up today's presentation. Today you had an opportunity, you have the opportunity to change someone's life, and by you participating in today's webinar and educating yourself on this issue is really the first step. The second step today is to share these resources and the information that you learned with your friends and your family. Because like we talked about today, often people in abusive or unhealthy relationships do not even know that they're in an unhealthy relationship or an abusive relationship and do not feel supported. So that's why it's important to show support and also educate them. The third step is to stay connected. So check in with your friends and your family, and that could be simply by sending a text message, which can go a long way. And we live in a time where information can be given to us at the touch of a button. So make sure that we also stay connected. So make sure you follow Like to Life on my social media pages listed here and also my YouTube page. Now, these steps are the start of the foundation for so much more. And for us to be able to speak up for and advocate against domestic violence and to speak up for individuals who may not have a voice for themselves just yet. But today we're able to educate ourselves and raise awareness on this issue and break the silence by you guys just participating today. So thank you all for participating in this webinar. Thank you to the TA Network for Children's Behavioral Health, the University of Maryland, Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, and lastly, Youth Move National for partnering with me to be able to host this webinar and to have this platform. So thank you guys all for today, and I think now we're going to move on to questions.
Yes. So there is a question in the chat box from Keaton, and it says, how do you navigate supporting young leaders and being leaders in this work and not exploiting them in the process? Also, we don't promote sharing your story. Although there is value in this, how do you do this and keep in mind that youth may not want this info online in 10 years from now or 10 years from now?
Okay, okay, great. That's a good question. So how do you navigate supporting young leaders and being leaders in this work and not exploiting them in your process? I think one of the first thing I want to address is that part of navigating these and supporting these young leaders is being transparent with them. And I've been able to do that, and the only way I've been able to do that is, one, by sharing my story. And when I say my story, I mean like sharing with them very detailed and not holding anything back about what I've experienced and how I became a survivor of dating violence. And so part of the key here is how I'm able to navigate that is because I've actually experienced it. And I think part of this is the relatability is a really big factor for people to be able to really want to engage in these conversations because they feel supported and they feel like they're not alone in the process. And so with that, I'm able to talk with them and let them know that this isn't going to be an easy process, and informing them of the things that I've experienced through my healing process and letting them know that it's an individual experience, but when I'm able to do that, they're more willing to really speak their truth. And part of that is, like I was saying before, is getting consent from them. And so any individual that you see where there's content on my website or on my social media pages, I'm able to get a actual consent, which is a document that really explicitly states how this film will be used or how this content will be used, and that they agree to it. And if they don't have to. But I make sure that first I'm very authentic and I share with them the things that I've gone through, and we're able to create a relationship from that. And so that relatability is the first key factor, and then making sure that they understand the process and the outcome of what sharing their survival story can have, and making sure that I get consent from them and that it's written consent so they're aware of that. And I think the second question is also, we don't promote sharing your story, although there is value in this. How do you do this? And keep in mind that youth may not want this info online 10 years from now. So I feel like I kind of answered that before, but understanding, making sure that I'm being transparent with them to make them understand, the outcome of what it can have after the fact that they share their survivor story, and also having that written consent so they have an explicit document for their own copies to show them that this will be shared on my social media, and not with, I think one point here that you made that was really important, let me just go back, where you said not exploiting them, with them having an understanding that the intention behind their story or this content that I'm sharing is to really help and support and promote services for other young voices to speak up and speak their truth, because this is a silent epidemic, but when more people have the courage to do that, the more we're able to break that silence. And so I don't exploit them because it's a way for them to understand, and I make this explicit for them to know that this is to help other individuals, and that's really the intention behind this. And so I hope that answers your question, and if I didn't, please feel free to ask away any other questions, but I hope that answered your question.
Thank you. Tonight, there was another, well, actually, I listed another question in the chat box, and I know we're out of time, but just briefly, is there any specific tips that you have that may be able to support communities in engaging young men in these conversations?
Oh, that's such a great question. So I don't know if you guys follow me on social media at One Mission, One Voice, and also make sure you follow my YouTube page, One Mission, One Voice, where you're going to see specific events that I've dedicated for youth, and in particular youth male, and in particular youth Black male. And so how do I do that, right? How do I do that goes back to those different tactics that we were talking about, is when I'm able to identify the type of my target audience, right, then I'm able to identify the geographics and the demographics of that. And so part of that is me doing the research, in particular looking up community organizations or small businesses that are owned specifically by Black men that are doing community work. And so, for instance, during my research, I was able to find the Village Cafe, which is a young, upcoming cafe that was founded by young Black men who not only have a cafe, but have been able to promote different community resources and events through their cafe. And so I had literally sent an email with that pitch and my video, and then from that I was able to set up a meeting with them and let them know about more in depth about the services that I've been able to provide and how I want to expand to really raise the voices of young Black men by really talking with them and letting them know the importance of how young Black men, and especially mental health and sexual assault, and are disproportionately impacted, and we need to create a space to talk about these issues. And then from that conversation, we were able to host 2 different events at their cafe, one focusing on men's mental health, and then the other one was focusing on men's mental health part 2, which focused on sexual violence. And because their outreach of the community had a majority of young Black men, that's how I was able to really engage those voices and bring that community and that population into these conversations, was because I was able to target specifically what community organization or business I wanted to reach out to, and letting them know the intention behind that through simple contact when sending them the email, and then setting up a meeting with them and talking about the importance of this issue.
Thanks so much, Sanaa, for that response. There is one more question in the chat box that I would like you to address. Before we do that, I did want to point everyone's attention to the survey also being linked in the chat box. Please, please, please fill out the feedback survey and let us know what we did good and what things we can improve. Tanaj, the last question in the chat box says, as far as youth engagement, is your program focused primarily on education, or are young people trained and supported in doing work where they are peer leaders in their communities, specifically around dating and sexual violence prevention afterwards?
Great. Thanks, Helen. That's a great question. And so to answer your question, yes, my mission for Light to Life as far as youth engagement, the focus is primarily education. And the reason that's the primary focus is because this particular issue that I've noticed, but now has been evolving in some schools and in some school programs, is that this is not an actual class or something that students are given. And I realized that throughout my education and also through my experiences, that this was not something that I had to, that I was given as a class in school, but this was something that I actively had to seek out. And so because of that, I noticed that there was a lack of education with this type of issue. And so that's why I really wanted to make the primary focus of this program to educate people, and not only to educate people, but for me to be educated myself on this issue, and to go to school and to receive my master's and to become a licensed behavioral specialist, so that I was able to really create a detailed trauma-informed curriculum that I knew. I'm sorry, there's some sirens in the background. But that focused on dating violence, but also keeping in mind of the things that I had experienced that I wish I would have known. And as far as young people being trained and supported in doing this work, there is not actually a training on how I do this. And I'm hoping that today was a great opportunity for others to be able to bring back to their communities on how to train young people to establish these kind of organizations, because like I was saying before, Light to Life originally was developed on a college campus where I was funded as the first domestic violence organization campus. So this can be done by youth if they see a need to and have a passion to do so on their college campus or in their high school. But in particular, if there's if there's a training on how I can train young people to conduct these kind of programs, there is not. So I hope today was the first step on being able to do that. But that's definitely something to consider.
Thank you so much, Sanaj. And again, I want to thank all of the participants for staying a few minutes extra on the line. But this was great information, and thank you so much, Sanaj, for presenting it, and we hope to see more from you in the future. That being said, again, thank you all for participating. Please click on the survey and take a minute to fill that out, and we will see you all in August for the next Direct Connect.